Hi Helen.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. How are you today?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm really good. I'm really looking forward to this, actually.
Good, good. Well, I hope you're going to enjoy it, and I hope you're going to get a lot from it.
I hope so, yeah.
So before we actually get into exploring your report, just a couple of things I want to let you know, which you will have covered when you did your step one, but I think it's important to just remind ourselves of. Okay. The session is confidential, so I'm not going to share anything that comes out of this with anybody else. I'm not going to share your report with anybody else. Mm-hmm. If you choose to, that's up to you, but I'm not going to share anything or the nature of our discussion. And just as with your MBTI step one, there's no right or wrong answers. So there is no best profile that you're aspiring to be. It's just exploring, this is how you've come out. Mm-hmm. How does that work for you?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions around that?
No, I don't think so. That sounds great. Can I take some notes during
of course
this,
you can. Yeah,
okay.
That's absolutely fine. You will get a detailed report.
Okay.
So at the end of it, or as we go through, we'll be exploring your report that you'll have to take away. So you will get a lot of information to read after our session together.
Okay, great.
Okay, so the other thing to say that might be slightly different from the step one feedback is this is more exploratory. So we're not looking to get best fit. Mm-hmm. Do you remember you would have done that when you did your step one?
Yeah.
Where you were looking to get your best fit time?
Yes. Yeah, the F and the P were, yes, no, I do remember.
Yeah. And can you remember what your best fit was?
My best fit was ENFP,
okay.
But I came up with a TP.
Okay, yeah. Well, we'll explore that in more detail as we go through the session today.
Yeah, I'd like to do that.
With your best fit of ENFP, how clear were you with that?
Yeah, very clear. I mean, the P particularly was the clearest.
Yes.
I got that with the whole spontaneity and flexibility. That made the most sense to me, definitely.
Yeah. Yes. And when you were going through the step one feedback, how sure were you around the other letters? So the E, the N?
Yeah, they made sense to me completely.
Brilliant.
It was just the P that I automatically identified with.
Great.
Made sense. Yeah, no, they made sense completely. Okay. Yeah.
And when you did your step one, your practitioner who was working with you would have said they're not going to tell you your best fit.
Yeah.
And similarly, I'm not going to tell you anything today. So I'm here to help you and explore with you and guide you through it. But I'm not going to tell you what you are or what you should be.
Okay.
It's up to you to decide for yourself and work things out and make sense of them.
Okay. Well, that sounds really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the process that we're going to use, and this is just to kind of talk you through it, I'm going to just give you a brief introduction around what step two is,
right,
and where it fits with step one. We're then going to look at each of the dimensions in turn, so EI, SN, TF and JP, and look at the behaviours that fit within that. And explore those in more detail. And then we're going to look at your whole profile. So how the E, the N, the F and the P work together and interact together. And then finally start to think about if there's any development, anything you want to do or work on as a result of the session today that we can then pick up in the coaching.
Oh, great.
Okay. So what particularly would you like to get out of today's session?
I suppose seeing how I can practically put it into practice, what I can take from this and help me to improve at work and get a better situation out of it, with my colleagues and clients. So how I can practically put it into practice, I think. Okay.
And I'm aware that you've also done a 360 as part of the coaching process. How was that?
Yeah, it was good. I got some lovely feedback from my clients. There were a few things, and some lovely things from my colleagues as well, but there were a few things that I was sort of slightly taken aback by, I have to be honest.
Okay.
But that's feedback, isn't it?
Do you want to say a bit more about?
Yeah, I mean, it's they mentioned that I was impractical. And a bit unpredictable when it came with clients as well. I mean, and they recognised that I was very good at selling, and an initial rapport with the clients was good, but it just took me back a bit that they had this view that I was impractical.
Thank you for that. And why I was asking you is because if we have the context of knowing what your situation is and the feedback that you have, then we can explore your step 2 in relation to that.
Okay. Yeah.
And hopefully your step 2 profile might shed some light on where that feedback might have come from.
Okay.
It might give you an indication of how other people might see you.
Yeah.
And maybe suggest some areas that you might like to work on if you thought it was appropriate.
No, that sounds brilliant. That sounds really good.
Excellent. Okay. So one thing that I said we'd talk about is where step 1 and step 2 fit together.
Yeah.
And you've already done your step 1, as we've talked about, and come up with your best fit as ENFP. I don't know if when you did your step 1 feedback, somebody talked to you about your step 1 being, or MBTI being a bit like the rooms in a house.
Yeah, that rings a bell actually. Yeah.
So you've got a house with 16 different rooms in, and your MBTI best fit is helping you work out which of those rooms you're most likely to be comfortable in.
Yeah.
And then step 2 is how are you going to decorate your room in your own unique way. So you've chosen your ENFP room as being your best fit, but now what we're going to explore is how your ENFP room is different from perhaps somebody else's ENFP room. So step 2 is bringing out the unique side of you, where you are different perhaps from other ENFPs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So I just wanted to share with you this diagram. So when we look at your profile, it's going to look a bit like this.
Right. Okay.
The purple bars are going to represent your score.
Right.
So it will go from 5 to 0 to 5. And the bar will indicate what your score was on that particular, what we call facet.
Okay.
If your score is what you would expect,
Yes.
so if you, in this case, we've got judging and perceiving, if you have a perceiving preference, then, and your bar is on the perceiving side, then the background is blue.
Okay.
So that's the behaviour we would expect from somebody with a perceiving preference. If your preference is not what we'd expect, so you've learned or you've naturally adapted to act in a more judging way, as in this case here, then the purple bar will be against the yellow. And we will talk about that as being out of preference.
Okay.
So that behaviour will be out of preference because it isn't what we would expect from somebody with a perceiving preference.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
And the other category is this category in the middle, which is kind of pale blue. And that's indicating that somebody's what we call in the mid-zone. And if somebody scores in the mid-zone, it means their score is dependent on the situation, dependent on the context.
Right.
So in some situations they might behave this way, some situations they might behave in another way.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this example here, in some situations somebody may behave in a more methodical way, and in other situations they may just jump in and see where it goes. And it's likely to be dependent on the situation.
Okay. Right.
So it might be at work I'm like this, at home I'm like this, with one group of people I'm like this, with a different group I'm like that.
Okay. So right. So it's situation based rather.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing to mention is as we go through step 2, I talked about the different rooms in the house. What step 2 is looking at is 5 what we call facets of behaviour that describe how you're likely to express your MBTI preferences. So, for example, with extroversion and introversion, it's looking at 5 facets in terms of how you behave with other people, so what other people are likely to see.
Right. Okay.
And you can, as we've seen here, end up with a completely different pattern of scores to somebody who's different.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll be exploring as we go through the process.
Okay. Got it.
Yep. Okay. Have you got any questions before we start?
No. I mean, I'm obviously interested because with the 360, I'm getting the feedback of how other people perceive me.
Yes.
And it's not how I necessarily think I'm behaving.
Yeah.
So that will help make sense of that, I think.
Brilliant.
Yeah.